Buried alive. In the 1800s, the fear of being buried alive was not a superstition. It was a documented medical problem. Cholera, catalepsy, and certain comas could reduce a living person's pulse and breathing to levels undetectable by the medicine of the time. A doctor could examine a patient for several minutes and find nothing. When certain graves were later reopened, some coffins reportedly showed scratch marks on the inside of the lid. Whether every such report was accurate is impossible to verify now. But enough circulated in the medical community that it changed how people were buried. Safety coffins became a real patented product. One design included a bell on a string connected to the occupant's hand, so a revived person could ring for help. Another included a speaking tube to the surface. Another, an escape hatch. Dozens of safety coffin patents were filed across Europe and America in the 1800s. The people who bought them were not eccentric. They had read the case reports. The fear was reasonable. The technology to prevent it was simply not there yet. And for some number of people, the worst happened before it arrived. Spontaneous human combustion. The cases all look the same. A heavily burned body. A mostly undamaged room. No obvious ignition source. No explanation. For most of history, no one had an answer. The cases were filed, studied, and left open. Then in the 1980s and 1990s, fire investigators began testing a theory. They called it the wick effect. A human body, given a small external ignition source, a dropped cigarette, a nearby candle, can begin to burn like an inverted candle, with clothing acting as the wick and body fat as the fuel. Lab experiments confirmed that under these conditions, a body can sustain combustion for hours at extreme internal temperatures while leaving fabric only inches away barely singed. Most classic cases now have a plausible explanation. But the wick effect needs a starting flame. And in a few documented cases, investigators found no evidence of any ignition source at all. Most of the mystery dissolved. A small part of it is still there. The Devil's Footprints. On the morning of February 8, 1855, people across Devon, England, woke to find a single trail of small hoof-shaped prints running through the snow. The trail covered over 100 miles in a single night. It climbed straight up vertical walls, crossed rooftops, passed directly through haystacks and came out the other side, and in at least one account, went directly up to a door and resumed on the other side as if it had passed through the wood. People in Devon refused to leave their homes. Churches filled for days. The local newspaper declared it the work of the devil. No animal was identified. No human track matched it. One researcher later proposed that a military balloon may have broken free from Devonport dockyard that night, dragging a rope and shackle across the snow, swinging and landing at intervals, producing a repeating pattern of marks. It is a plausible theory. It does not explain the prints climbing vertical walls, or passing through solid structures, or the fact that multiple witnesses in locations miles apart reported the trail arriving from different directions. No one has solved it. The trail was real. Every print was real. Nearly 200 years later, the explanation is not. The Dancing Plague. In July 1518, in Strasbourg, a woman named Frau Trophia walked into the street and began to dance. She danced for 6 days without stopping. Within a week, 30 people had joined her. By the end of the month, the number had reached roughly 400. They danced day and night without pause. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Some died of heart failure or stroke. The city authorities consulted physicians. Following the medical understanding of the time, they decided the cure was more dancing. They hired musicians, built a stage, and brought in professional dancers to keep the afflicted moving. Strasbourg in 1518 was in the middle of a humanitarian crisis. Famine had lasted for years. Syphilis and smallpox were spreading. The leading theory among modern researchers is mass psychogenic illness, a documented phenomenon where extreme collective stress produces real, involuntary physical symptoms across a group. Mass psychogenic illness is documented in schools, factories, and towns to this day. The mechanism is understood. What it cannot fully explain is why the symptom in 1518 was specifically, unstoppably, dancing. The suffering was real. The deaths were real. The best explanation available still has a gap in it. Corpse light. For 800 years, people living near bogs and marshes in Britain and Northern Europe reported the same thing. Small lights, floating just above the water, moving on their own in the dark. They called it will-o'-the-wisp, ignis fatuus, fool's fire. The consistent account across centuries was always the same: a light that moved, that could be followed, and that led travelers off safe paths into the bog. For most of history it sat in the folklore category, assumed to be imagination. Then scientists began proposing a chemical explanation. Decaying organic matter in bogs produces gases including phosphine and methane. One hypothesis, proposed and debated since the 1980s, is that under specific atmospheric conditions these gases can ignite spontaneously near the surface, producing a small, short-lived flame. The problem is that spontaneous ignition of phosphine under real field conditions has proven extremely difficult to reproduce in experiments. The chemistry is plausible. The real-world confirmation is not settled. 8 centuries of consistent eyewitness testimony. A chemical mechanism that makes sense. And no one has yet managed to definitively prove the two are connected. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. In September 1944, in Mattoon, Illinois, a woman reported waking to a strange sweet smell near her bedroom window. Her legs went numb. She could not move them. The local newspaper ran the story under the headline "Mad Anesthetist Strikes." Within 4 days, 25 residents reported the same symptoms across different parts of town, from people who had not spoken to each other. Police investigated every report. They found no canister, no chemical residue, no vehicle, no footprints near affected windows. No conclusive physical evidence of any attacker or any gas was ever recovered. A sociologist published an analysis in 1945 concluding that the symptoms were psychogenic, produced by anxiety, not by any external agent. The newspaper coverage, he argued, created an expectation that became self-fulfilling. The symptoms were real. The nausea and the paralysis were experienced genuinely by real people. The most likely explanation is that a town under wartime stress read a frightening story and made itself sick. It is the most documented kind of legend. Not a monster. Not a gas. A town, terrified, making the terror physical. Loch Ness. Loch Ness is a lake in the Scottish Highlands 23 miles long and nearly 800 feet deep. The water is so stained with peat that visibility below the surface drops to almost nothing within a few meters. Reports of something large in the water go back to the 6th century. The modern legend began in 1933 when a couple reported watching a large animal cross the road near the lake. Within weeks, similar accounts were arriving from other locals. The most famous piece of evidence arrived in 1934. A photograph appeared to show a long neck rising from the lake. It was reproduced around the world for 60 years as the definitive image of the Loch Ness monster. In 1994, the photographer's stepson revealed the truth. The neck was a sculpted clay head attached to a toy submarine, assembled as revenge against a newspaper. The photograph that defined a legend was 17 inches long. The photo was gone. The legend looked finished. Then in 2019, a team from the University of Otago conducted an environmental DNA survey of the lake, collecting water samples and analyzing every trace of biological material they could find. They found no trace of a large reptile or an unknown species. But the lake contained an unusually high concentration of eel DNA, far more than the visible eel population would account for. The researchers described it as an interesting and unexplained result. The photograph was a toy. The monster story is 90 years old. The lake has more eel DNA in it than anyone can explain. What it comes from, no one has gone back to find out.